Hello, friends, and welcome to the Ed3 podcast. I'm so excited to be here with our guest, Tim Connors. He is a bike riding, Cali living, business starting, Hong Kong studying, cross country running, credential building founder of 101.xyz. He is a knowledge management geek, filling the holes in our leaky bucket brains. And he also is a music festival host who almost got sued by Woodstock. Startup version of Connor Oberst meets the dude. His chill vibes masks his brilliance, and the flowing locks distracts from the massive changes his company's creating in the world. He's helping us reimagine credentials and how we can improve expertise. So let's dive in right now with the one, the O, the one, Tim Connors. So tell us a little bit about on-chain credentials. So that might be a new term for some of our listeners. So give us the theory behind it and why we need on-chain credentials. And then we can kind of go into how you're thinking about it from a company perspective.
The way that I think about credentials basically is that credentials are meant to be a proxy for your knowledge. And in order to be a proxy for your knowledge, they need to establish trust between you and whoever you're trying to show the credential to. My understanding of like how credentials work is they primarily rely on three main variables. One is the integrity of the data. So like, does the fact that the credential exists, like, will that always exist? Like, can it be readable? The second is the quality of the content, right? Like, is the content behind the data, the credential, like the course or whatever, is it comprehensive enough? And then the third is the reputation of the issuer. It's like, okay, maybe I can see the data and the course is super, super great, but like ultimately it comes down to the issuer's reputation, how they like decide to award those credentials. You know, maybe they let everyone fail and they still give out the credential. So there's ultimately some amount of trust that you need to give to the issuer, no matter what. And the problem with the credentials today is that like that first and second parameters are basically like opaque. A lot of credentials, like certificates, whether they're like college degrees or like those earned on like online course platforms, are PDFs or something similar that are stored in private servers. They're not necessarily readable by machines by default. They don't have a standard form. They don't necessarily, there's no guarantees that they'll exist in that same format 10 years from now. And then the content behind the credential, like the course, if there's a very extreme lack of transparency into that as well. Like, has the course changed over time? If you earned this credential 5 years ago, does the course from 5 years ago look different from the course from now? And so like because those two parameters are really opaque, have a situation now where all credentials that are being issued in our current system are entirely reliant on that third leg at the table, which is the reputation of the issuer. That was really, really dense, but basically you don't know how a good a credential is. So you just have to trust the issuer. That's how the way the world works right now. And the problem with that is there's only so much trust to go around, which is why, you know, no matter what tier of the education world you look at, there's very, very few players that have all the trust. They have a monopoly on trust, and therefore they have a monopoly on useful credentials, and everyone else doesn't get to issue useful credentials at all. So that monopoly is why, you know, big brand name institutions like Harvard or Yale can charge 10 times the price for the same quality of education, because they know they're the only game in town for useful credentials. That's the big problem that we're trying to solve. So
let's hear about 101 and then, because that is a huge problem and I want to dive into it, but I think it's interesting how people go about solving it. Because like you said, there's multiple angles, right? So curious how you are thinking about that with your tool.
There's too much like opaqueness in the way that credentials are earned and issued today. And so what's amazing about Web3 architecture is that you can bring a lot of trusted transparency into the equation. You can have autonomous code running that dictates the logic by which credentials are issued. And you can have storage, like decentralized storage, where content or the courses can be stored in perpetuity and every change can be logged and viewable. And so in this fashion, you can kind of like put a lot of sunlight on in how the credentials are actually issued, such that even like 100 years from now, someone could see a badge and link it back to the exact version of the course you took and see an entire history of on-chain data that of other people earning those credentials and going on doing other things. It's just setting a new baseline of transparency that allows credentials to kind of stand on their own merit rather than being entirely contingent on trusted third parties.
Yeah. Yeah. So how does, walk us through 101 then, because I've been able to play with it a little bit, and I think it'll be a format people are fairly familiar with. But I think what jumps out to me is the piece you just added there at the end, which is making this searchable, provable, something that other people can also view instead of just putting it on my LinkedIn profile.
Yeah. Yeah. So the way that our tech works is you use our no code course builder to put together the content, select well, let me preface that by saying all the credentials on 101 are currently issued as non-transferable NFTs. So your audience might be familiar with NFTs as art, but they're just a technology. They don't need to be art. They can be any type of like unique piece of data. We use NFTs not as art, but as certificates that the user can hold in their wallet to prove to other people that they know something. So all of our courses issue non-transferable NFTs when you pass the course. And what 101 provides is a way to easily make the content, select the blockchain network that you want to use to issue your credential, whether it's Ethereum or Polygon or whatever, and customize what you want that badge to look like and publish it on the open internet for anyone to come and take. And the unique piece that we're providing is we're not just sending NFTs, we're making sure that students that go through the course sign with their private key. And only then are they sent a credential. And so that's a really, really important technical piece that is a lot of times overlooked when people are thinking about how to design this, is you need to ensure that whoever the same person that completed the course, this person that is receiving the badge, otherwise it's not very useful. And that wallet authentication that we're providing with the Snow Code tool is what was missing from the space and why we need to create a course builder. We can't just be tacking on NFT badges at the end of like normal LMS systems, because there needs to be a link.
Yeah. So you're validating the identity. And so for those of you unfamiliar, a wallet is, kind of the place where you keep all your digital stuff, right? And you're able to not only hold them, but also sign, which is essentially validating, like logging into to Facebook, right? Is basically saying, this is Scott Meyer, this is Tim. Who's using this? I think one thing that I know you mentioned is a lot of DAOs being interested. So decentralized autonomous organizations who are basically bringing people together. So walk us through a little bit about where the interest is for this. A lot of people jump to this is going to replace the college degree. In my mind, this is probably additive right now, right? So talk about maybe things that haven't been credentialed and how you maybe solve that or add value to some of these activities.
Definitely, definitely. Like the introductory themes that you and I talked about at the start of this conversation are definitely kind of like the ethos and the long-term plan. But where we're starting today, as you're saying, is like very different. The day that UCLA uses 101's like technology to issue credentials at graduation is like very, very far away. And that will probably be one of the last educators in the world to use 101 because they already have a brand. They already are issuing useful credentials. Yeah. So they really don't need this. They're really going to be the last people in the entire world that use it. For now, we're focusing on the people that we've identified as most likely to kind of like intuit the value of these tools, because everything about crypto is education and user education. So we wanted to minimize having that problem ourselves by giving it to people that are already building Web3. And from there, we noticed the biggest need when it comes to education across the Web3 community is exactly what I'm saying, which is user onboarding. Why do you want to use this product? Why do we care about it? How do we stay safe when we're doing so? How do we participate in your community? There's a lot of new paradigms that users need to figure out in order to interact with DAOs and DeFi protocols and wallets and exchanges. And every single organization struggles with teaching their audience about these things. So what we're offering is a really easy way for them to not just make the kind of UX to educate people, but to attach these credentials as a means of incentivizing or enforcing user education.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is you can actually say, hey, if you earn this badge, then you can join our community. Then you can vote on our proposals. Then you can have this functionality inside of our app. And before, if you don't earn the badge, you can't have it because we don't know. We want to make sure that you stay safe. A less like kind of strict way of using it is, oh, if you get all of our badges, we'll give you a free item for our merch store. Or a feature that we're really excited about coming up is if you get this badge, we'll actually send you currency, we'll send you money, we'll pay you to learn. And that's the learn to earn model, which we can talk about. So there's all these interesting ways that this architecture can allow orgs to incentivize learning for user education. And that's really where we're focused right now. So that's why the courses look like the way that they do. Very short, tappable cards. They're not video. They're not blogs. They're like Snapchat stories.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, for people listening, we want to actually put this into action, right? So if you're listening or you go to the show notes, you'll actually find a link to a 101 course about this podcast. So make sure you listen to the whole podcast, and then you get to answer a few questions and get an NFT for completing the podcast. So that'll be a fun way to test it out. But it also kind of connects to my next question, which is about this idea of trust, because it's a big problem people are trying to solve with verifiable credentials is, do you have trust registries, networks of trust? So talk a little bit about, a DAO gives me a 101 class or test. How do I know that that is actually trustworthy? Is it me having to look at the content, or is it me seeing other people in the marketplace who have that credential and I see how good they are? Or how do you kind of think about trust building for non-traditional educators?
Yeah. You mean like, how do we establish trust from the third party's perspective that a credential is useful? It's like, stands for what it says it stands for.
Yeah. I want to go work for another DAO and they say, hey, you did this for CCS, so you're going to be a great fit for us, something like that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, like, I think the first thing is just is again, like leaning on this baseline of transparency. So if I'm a third party and I'm coming in and looking at Scott's like 101 badges, I can view them on 101 or any other like NFT viewer and see baked into the metadata, just the details of each one of your badges points back to the content that was actually earned. So, oh, what's this badge? Oh, here's the actual version of the course that he earned at the time that he earned this badge. And here is the success rate of all the students that also attempted to pass through that same course. And here's the number, here's the quantity of them. And here's what happened to those same wallet addresses in the future, which is really, really interesting to think about. It's like, imagine if all of the like outcomes or like the career outcomes of students that pass through UCLA were at least in some part visible in the public. Then we could all make really, really informed decisions about how effective UCLA's degree is versus Harvard. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So this is like what's possible with this new kind of like baseline. So the first thing is lean on that.
Yeah.
But like, even then, like, I don't want to pretend like, you can't have, that there's gonna be zero trust needed. This isn't like, we're not solving for people being malicious or trying to mislead. Like, we're not eradicating, adversarial human behavior. We're just reducing it significantly such that these credentials have a shot at being like taken seriously. For all other cases, will likely be governed, by a community DAO that helps establish like verified profiles so that we can say for sure, like whether or not a creator is who they say they are and stuff like that. So for like curbing malicious behavior, that'll be community governed.
Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit about someone who wants to go out and see these people who have gotten these credentials. To me, a piece that I see missing is making it easy to go find everyone who has, a poet from a specific event, or someone who has a 101 on communication or whatever it might be. Etherscan's there, but it's not so easy for an employer to go search it, right? So how do you kind of think about building that next step, or is that already happening in some way? So I'm an employer, I'm not that tech savvy, but maybe I know enough to be dangerous. Like, how do I go find 101 graduates to then offer them a job?
Yeah. So, I mean, The first thing is you can link your 101 badges right in your LinkedIn. I have one, I think, linked on my LinkedIn, and it right now it links to OpenSea. OpenSea is one of many different NFT marketplaces that just pulls NFTs right from the blockchain. Any other similar marketplace or NFT viewer also show 101 badges. However, there's kind of like use case specific interface details that we want to like allow for people to like more easily kind of look through the people. And so we're building out those screens ourselves. So that way recruiters can go in and answer this very questions that you're asking me. Like, show me a list of all the people that have taken this course or that like took this series of courses, or we have a little leaderboard that we're coming out with on our homepage where it's like the most kind of enthusiastic learners on 101. So I think we'll be experimenting with that in the next year of like, how can we make sure that, these students are really discoverable?
Right. Yeah. Well, I have to ask you then, there's obviously a debate going on right now about soul-bound tokens, kind of non-transferable tokens like you have versus, say, verifiable credentials, which you get to decide if they're shown or not. So curious how you're thinking about that at 101 and maybe what you've heard from your users in terms of, we want this on chain versus maybe not on chain.
Yeah, definitely. So like as a very early stage startup, the first thing I'll say is like, we don't have the luxury of like, we don't necessarily have the luxury of like waiting for ecosystems to be built. And
Right.
so our call when we decided to like first build the tech in January was we decided that the landscape of verifiable credentials and the amount of users that knew how to interact with them with identity wallets was a lot smaller than those that knew how to interact with NFTs. And that was the extent of the thinking. So we have no explicit like love for representing credentials in one way or the other. I think there's like pros and cons, obviously, as is being discussed. And we want to make sure that, in the long run, we're just giving the tools for the communities and students themselves to decide on what's best. Ultimately, like I could see a world in which we allow the creators to decide themselves, like how exactly do you want to issue these credentials? You pick the paradigm.
Right.
I personally think that like the the backlash against non-transferable NFTs is somewhat, I can understand that. But in our use case, there's two things I would add. One is that, well, I agree. We don't really want things to be non-transferable. That's just like a design detail that ideally we'll probably have them be semi-transferable in the long run so that you can throw them in the garbage. Or if you prove your humanity behind two wallets, you could send them. But what we didn't want to do was for the credentials to be worthless right at the gate. And to be able to just arbitrarily send them to any wallet address means that that credential is worthless. So because we were dealing with somewhat lightweight use case where it's just like, show that you took this little quiz, it's not like really private information. It's something that you would share on LinkedIn, which would be seen much more than
Right.
your NFTs. That's why we thought it was an appropriate place to start.
Yeah, no, I love that. Well, want to end with a couple of big picture questions. The first one is, what's the optimistic outcome of this? I mean, one thing I think of when you talk about what you're building, it gets me really excited to think about all the people around the world who can't get a job or an opportunity because they did go to the place that has trust. When you talk about, they didn't go to UCLA or Harvard, either financially, geographically, time-wise, and now maybe they could, in an optimistic outcome, be seen as a great person to work with because they have this NFT. So I'm curious, when you're thinking about 101 big picture, what's kind of the optimistic world-changing impact that you might have?
Definitely. I mean, definitely along the lines of what you're thinking, or just allowing the world to make more data-driven decisions on the way we think about various types of credentials,
Mm.
uh, whether that comes to like, yeah, hiring or otherwise. I think that this technology really only needs to be built once, right? Like The only reason it's been built multiple times in Web 2 is because like Web 2 is a much more adversarial landscape and like competitive. It's very difficult to have like long-term sustainable collaboration in that realm. But in this realm, it's a little bit different. And so we see ourselves as like building out the long-term infrastructure for all online learning credentials. And we want to make sure that it's composable for massive institutions to build on top of. We built an interface that you can see on our website, but that's just one interface to use the tools that we've made, right? And so we want to make sure that, we're putting ourselves in a position to kind of like bring the entire world of Web2 online learning onto the chain and like play our role in facilitating that in a somewhat standard format so that it's all very easy for the world to use and discover, and for this future to be as I don't know, productive as possible.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Well, I'm passionate about encouraging people to come to the space and build. So I'm curious, as you create your startup, what's missing? Like what needs to be built in the worlds of credentials or education or even Web3 that people out there should think about, jumping in, contributing to, or learning more about?
I still feel like there's a lot of opportunities for like shovels, fix and shovel plays, like help other people build stuff. I think like I'd like to continue. I'm a big like UX UI person. So like to the extent that we can help make wallets more like easier to use and simpler, I love to see that. Exchanges that are easier and simpler to use, different like remittance applications that abstract away all this like technical detail about, your seed phrase and whatever. There's a lot of people that are working on these problems, but they're really difficult UX UI challenges. And wherever there's challenge like that, there's opportunity. So I think there could be more stuff there.
That's
So
amazing. That's so great. Well, give us the final kind of what to look for in 101. Tell us where to go learn more and what we should be looking for in the upcoming weeks and months.
yeah, I talk a lot about our story building out the project on my Twitter. Our website is 101.xyz. We post some courses there. Although I will say, like at this stage in our company's history, we're pretty focused on being like a single player tool for communities to engage with their audience. So, we're just kind of like biding our time and growing that library before we jump and really put a lot of gas on the fire of being like a consumer destination. So feel free to come and check us out, but don't judge us from what you see. In the next few months is when we'll really begin to like invite people to create their profiles and earn a bunch of badges and stuff. So, but in the meantime, that functionality does exist. It's just a little rough around the edges and we're not promoting it. So you can go and check it out. Let me know what you think.
Go kick the tires. Yeah. And you can take your 101 test at ed3.gg. And of course, we're so excited to have you, Tim, on the podcast, on the video. We're really here to scale education. I think you're becoming an integral part of that. So we're all cheering for you. We're excited for what you're building and we look forward to keeping in touch online. Have a great day.
Thanks, Scott. You too, man. See ya.